emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Video opening, take 425. Hey everyone, it's Foxx from Model Making Guru here. Hello, welcome to part 4 of our build of what I am calling the Warhammer 40K Imperial Skitter light reconnaissance vehicle, which we're filming for emodels.co.uk, my channel sponsors and very good friends who provided this kit. Now, if you remember, we're actually taking the Takom 135th Panhard AML-90 light armoured car, which is the basis of this kit, and we basically just like glommed lots of Warhammer things onto it, like the auto cannon on the front, and we've got the big spotlight and the bits and bobs and the hatch covers and packs and things like that. So we're doing a Kitbash. Now, in the previous episodes, you remember, we've got all the bits stuck on, we've got everything done up, and we've got the base colours painted, so you've got this lovely blue sort of camo, slightly urban, slightly wintry camo scheme now. And we're all but done with the actual painting the colours on. There is still stuff to do on, say, these green parts and some of these knapsacks and rucksacks and things to make them look a bit more three-dimensional. There are some more bits to do, but at this stage, we're basically ready to start the weathering. So, we're not going to start it just yet, though, because the first thing we need to do is the decals. Now, I get asked this a lot. We get asked on the Models live stream. I get asked this all the time. Ted, Chris, and I always get asked this about waterslide decals. How do you do it? What do you do? What order do you do things in? First thing to keep in mind is, remember, I'm filming these for absolute beginners. Waterslide decals represent things painted onto the surface of your vehicle. So it makes no sense to put all the weathering on and then the decal, because what you're saying is in the factory they painted a number on the side and somehow that number is miraculously clean, but everything else is battered and beaten. So decals go on once you finish your main base colours before you start your weathering. Yes, we have done the chipping, and what you can do is you can put your decals on and then do your chipping. We've already done the chipping because I wanted to get it done, but we're going to get round that when we put these decals on. Now, if you ever ask the question to me, Ted, Chris, Fox and I, or Ted or Chris or Fox or me or I, then we will always say the way to do decals, the best way is to put a gloss coat down, then your decal, then another gloss coat to seal it in. And that is true for 99.999% of the time. That is the tried and true best way to do decals. But I'm actually not going to do that at all. And I'll tell you for why. There's two reasons. Very quickly, I'll tell you. I could put a gloss coat down on this first. Common sense would say put a gloss coat down. The reason you do a gloss coat is that when you put a water slide decal onto a surface, if the surface isn't smooth, then air can get trapped underneath, and that can cause what's called silvering, where you get like fogging around the clear parts of the decal because air's trapped underneath. If the surface is ever so slightly rough or pitted, like orange peeled, like you get with matte paint or with matte varnish, then air can get trapped underneath. A gloss coat helps prevent that because it's a smoother surface. You might still get it, but it's a lot less likely. So normally I would gloss coat the model first. However, I've put the wheels on and these have got nice rubber tyres. I don't know how a gloss varnish would react when sprayed over these tyres. Over the paint it'd be fine, it'd just turn it gloss. These are smooth and slightly shiny and not porous, and they've kind of got low grip surfaces, low friction surfaces. There is every chance, it's probably unlikely, but there is every chance that when I spray gloss varnish over these rubber parts, the gloss varnish would be affected by the surface tension and it would pull apart from each other. All the layer of gloss would separate out into beads, it would bead up. It's highly unlikely, but it's not impossible over that kind of surface. If you ever tried painting over a gloss surface with an airbrush, you get the same kind of thing. It's not easy. So I'm not going to take that risk. It will probably be fine, but I'm not going to take the risk. So we're not going to gloss varnish. What are we going to do? Well, luckily, the decals we do have, as I said, they're tiny. They're microscopic. Two things in our favour. One, they're all white. You can't see them because it's blue paper with white decals. These are the decals that came with the Games Workshop figures, so they're all little markings. And GW, traditionally, their decals are very, very nice quality. They're almost cartographing quality. The film is very close to the printed detail, so you don't have a lot of clear carrier film. So even if some air gets trapped under there, it's not going to be such a major issue. So I'm actually going to put the decals onto the paint, onto the bare paint, unvarnished. And then once they're on there and they've had time to dry it, I'm just going to go over them with a matte varnish, but I'm just going to brush the matte varnish over the decals, not over the whole kit. just over the decals. You know, if I put one on this panel here, I probably just matte varnish that whole panel just so it doesn't look odd, so there's some consistency. The second reason I need to do that is the first step of weathering I'm going to do is a filter, and filters traditionally work on a matte or satin surface better. They don't work quite as well on a shiny surface, so again I can't gloss, decal and gloss, because then I'm trying to put a filter on a shiny surface, so I'd have to gloss, decal, gloss and then matte varnish, and that's a lot of faff, and again I don't know what the gloss will do over the rubber. So what we're going to do is get the decal on, do any distressing to it. We might do some chipping with a knife blade to make it look distressed. Then I will matte varnish over it just with a brush, just very carefully, just over the decal or the panel, and then we can go ahead and start the weathering, and that's where we're going to go. So I'll go and get that done. Now again, as I said, this is not how you would normally do decals. I did a very similar thing when I did the little tank build for the Christmas special live stream. I just slapped the decals on and they came out fine, and I have done it before, and where the decals are very, very small and good quality, you can get away with it. So, and because we've only got 4 decals, it's nothing that, so we'll give it a try. So I'll go and get everything ready and we'll do some water slide decals. I don't know why I'm put my finger there for. Okay, so let's get this done. Now what we're going to do, I'll show you the biggest one we have, which is this one, which I don't know if it'll come out on camera, but it says 144. Little nod of the hat to Chris there and his 144 scale models. And we're going to put this on the back of the turret here, because there aren't many places you can actually put decals, which is a bit of a pain. Shot myself in the foot there. So we're going to put this on the back here. So what will we need? We need obviously the decal, the water slide decal. We need some the tweezers. We need some the cotton buds, and we need some the warm water. Not hot water, just warm water. So what we want to do is get the water to one side there. It's just off camera, but it's just there. And it could be easier. I'm going to get myself a piece of tissue, kitchen roll in this case. I always forget to get this ready. Sigh. Piece of kitchen roll here. Apologies for the white balance explosion. And all we're going to do is we're going to get the decal. Now when I trim this off the sheet, I use my modelling knife to trim it off the sheet. And I tried to trim it as close as I could to the decal, just to minimise the amount of clear carrier film. But like I said, on these decals there isn't much anyway. So get our decal. I'm going to dip it in the warm water. Again, warm, not hot. Just for a few seconds. That should be enough. And then I'm going to take it out, put the water to one side where I can't possibly spill it, Tony. Take any excess off, and then just put it there for a second. Now what you'll also need, which I forgot to get, is a brush, a soft brush. Soft brush. Okay, so I'm going to get the brush wet, just so it's got some water on it. And decal's over here. If you can't see it, I've put it off to the side because I'm dead special. And we'll just see. There you go. That decal is now. You can see it's moving around quite easily. So this shouldn't be easy. Now I'm going to do this with tweezers. If you're just beginning and starting out, I wouldn't recommend doing this, moving the decal around with tweezers. But if you're an old hand at this, using tweezers is fine. I get shouted at for using tweezers to move my decals around. But I've been doing this for 30 years. So you want to grab the piece of paper, but try and grab it away from the film. So you're grabbing the paper but not the film on the decal. And then just slide your decal on, like that, just lightly with your finger. Pull the paper out from under the decal. Don't drag the decal around too much. Just pop it down like that. Now it should, if you're lucky, it will still move around. I hope this is in focus. It will still move around quite easily. If it doesn't move around much, all you need to do is get a bit of water on your brush and just wet it again, and that will give the decal a chance to move around. Like I said, now I'm doing this with my tweezers. If you're used to doing decals, then using tweezers is fine. I've never yet ripped a decal using tweezers, he says, tempting fate to make him rip the decal with his tweezers. Now because this is on a matte surface, obviously it's going to have trouble moving around as much as if it was on a gloss surface, but we can cope with that. So we're going to get that lined up where we think it's kind of in the middle and where we want it to be. I think about there. Okay, so that is now on. Now what you can do, take your cotton bud, You could use a piece of tissue, but I just found a cotton bud easier for small decals. And very gently, no real pressure, put the cotton bud over it and just roll it with your fingers like that. So I'm rolling it over the surface, and this will do two things. It will press the decal down onto the surface and make it sort of fold into any little gaps and lumps and bumps. It will also remove any excess moisture. And I'm being very gentle. I'm not pushing down hard. Okay, and that is now on. That is done. That is as hard as decals get. Now, like I said, if you get the decal on there and you want to move it around and it's being a bit rough, and especially if you do it on bare paint and it won't move, just get some water on it. Just go over it with the brush of water. If you're not comfortable using tweezers, like I say, people often shout at me for doing this. I've been doing it for a long time, and I've learned that I can either push the decal from the edges and just push it along, or some decals are tough enough that you can actually move them around by, you know, getting the tweezers on the decal and pushing them. I just happen to know that GW decals are pretty tough. They're pretty hardcore, so it's not a problem. Give that some more squish. This also gets out any air from underneath the decal. The other reason for doing this with the cotton bud. If there are any air bubbles in there, then this gets them out. Now, I've given it a few seconds. When you first go in to get the water out, be gentle. When I'm going back now, I'm actually very carefully pushing down a bit harder just to push out any air bubbles. Now, the reason I need to be more conscientious of this now is because I'm doing this over the paint and not over a gloss varnish. So I need to make sure there are no air bubbles in there at all. So that is now on. Now, there's been no silvering. There's no obvious air bubbles. I won't know that for sure until it dries, but we'll keep an eye on it. Now, what I would normally traditionally do here is go in with some solvent solutions like Microset and Microsol to make it bed down and remove the film. I might do that, but I might not, because I don't know how they will react with the bare paint. So I may just have to leave it like that and hope for the best. So I'll get the rest of the decals done. But like I said, that's as complicated as waterslide decals get. If you're not comfortable using tweezers, you can use your wet brush to push them around, or a cotton bud to push them around, or a cocktail stick, whatever you find is more convenient. I'm just so used to doing it with these tweezers. If you're going to use tweezers, try and get some of these with the bendy, pointy grips, because I can do delicate movements on the edge of the decal like that, or I can turn it over and use it that way for shoving them whilst being in contact with the decal. And I've just noticed, looking at this all close up now, yeah, I need to do some touch up on here because I've not fully touched it up, but don't worry about that, we'll sort that out later. So that is waterslide decals. That is as hard as it gets. So if you've never done one before, dive in and have a go. Dive in and have a go. So I'll go and get the rest done, and when we come back, we'll start the actual weathering. Yes, weathering. I love making a mess. Mess times. Okay, so the decals have had a while to dry. I actually left them overnight because I went to bed. But as you can see, they've come out pretty good. No real silvering issues or anything like that. No bubbles. I only did one on the actual body of the vehicle. That was just here. These little skulls, like kill indicators maybe. But yeah, they came out really nice. Now, they're not 100% perfect because you've got to yet put matte varnish over them and get weathering on top of them, but that's fine. So that'll all hide away. You can see in the light perhaps there's a little bit of the film there, because it's not perfect. You will get a tiny amount of silvering, but again, when you see them straight on, it's fine. And once they're weathered over and varnished over, that won't be an issue. You won't even see that. So what's next? Well, before we start the weathering, before we matte varnish over these, remember how I said that decals effectively simulate things painted on the surface of the vehicle, and how if you paint something on top of a car, then when that paint chips away, the marking will go away with it. So we need to do that now, and this is where your sort of decal part of your brain screams, because you're about to hack away at decals. All I'm going to do is got myself some tweezers, or you can use a knife blade or whatever you want. Anything sharp and pointy, a pin will do. And we're going to basically scrape away at these decals, like for example here, where there's a big sort of rust patch and chipped paint here underneath. We need to hack away at that, because it doesn't make sense that this paint would remain when the paint underneath has disappeared. So all we need to do is get our tweezers and just very gently start scraping away. Now you've got to go gently, because you don't want to start scraping the paint underneath them off as well. So you just need to very slowly work your way around the decal. Just make sure it follows the chip area. So it might take a while, but trust me, it's more than worth it. Okay, so that's the decals all scratched up. As you can see, there's not a lot to. There's a little tiny bit on there, and there's that big chunk there, which is where that came off. Tiny bit on the turret, and that was about it really. So it wasn't much to do. They've been brushed over with some of the which one was it? It was the Ammo by Mig matte varnish, and just left for a couple of hours to dry. Now we can start with the weathering. Yes. So the first thing we're going to do is a filter. Now, what is a filter? A filter is something you don't have to do when you're weathering, but I quite like doing them. A filter is basically a very, very, very thin paint that's sole purpose is to tint the model. It's not designed to collect in recesses or offer shade or shadow or anything like that. It's just designed to tint it, and it's literally, the reason it's called a filter is it's like when you get a stage light, like a spotlight, and they put a piece of transparent but slightly coloured clear plastic over the front to tint the light, so you get a blue spotlight or a red spotlight, or they're called filters. Same thing, it's just something that goes over the paint to tint it slightly, so it needs to be very transparent. Now I was going to use one of the Ammo by Mig filters. They have specific paints designed as filters. I can't find it anywhere I can't find it, it's just gone. So I'm going to make my own, and it's dead easy. All you need is some oil paint thinner, odorless terpenoid, odorless oil paint thinners, anything like that, and some oil paint. Or you can use enamels. You can thin enamels a lot as well. I've got some oil paints. You need a big brush. Yeah, that's nice. This is one of my expensive. It's called a filbert, and that's just the best name ever, because now I'm getting memories of Rocco's Modern Life and Filbert, who he started a driving school called the Adequate School of Driving. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing adequately. So it's called a filbert. It's a System 3 Daler. It's super expensive. I got a load of oil paint brushes once in the art store and then never used them. So they're all like £300 each or something. They're not really. And I've got a crappy old brush which is actually too big. Let me get a smaller one. There, we've got a different crappy brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to make our own filter. And it's no different to making a wash really. You're just doing it a lot thinner. So small amount of the thinners. And again, these are oil paint thinners. Enamel paint thinners will work just as well because they're the same. They're mineral spirits basically. You can use terps or white spirit, but they stink. So I go for some odorless oil paint thinners. But I think both Ammo and I think AK do some thinners as well. And now we have a paint. I've just randomly chosen a light rust brown from 502 Abteilung. And all we're going to do is, if I can get the lid off, oh, you bugger. Oh, hello. Not used this one for a while. The lid's stuck on. There we go. Get the lid off, and I only need the tiniest amount of paint. Just the tiniest amount. I know it's out of focus. I'm focused on the desk, so for this bit, tiniest amount of paint to start with. Maybe that much is enough. Let's see. And we're just going to get that in there and do that. Now that's a little bit stark and bright red, so I'm going to put some more thinner in and see how that comes out. Okay, so the idea is, I haven't got anything I can paint it on to show you, but I'll do it on this lid. The idea is that when you paint it on, it's a bit like a wash and it will go into recesses, but if you do it just right, it will just kind of tint it, so you can brush it around and it will come out of the recesses, and if you move it around it will tint the piece. So it's a very kind of stark red colour, but I quite like it. So let's get that brush there. What we're going to do now is get our big brush, and I'm going to move the camera so you can see it properly and get it in focus. I'm going to get the big brush, so give me a second. I'll just reorient the focus. I'll show you how we're going to do a filter. Oh, I can't get this lid back on the paint now. Oh, the only downside with oil paints in tubes, yeah, that's the downside of oil paints in tubes. Let me refocus the camera. Right, there we go, that's refocused. So all we're going to do is get our big brush. One thing I've noticed about this kit, by the way, I don't know why, but every time I put it down on something and leave it for a few hours, when I pull it back, it's like, it sticks. These tyres kind of stick to things, I don't know why, it's kind of sticky. Anyway, we're going to get our filter. And this is where I have to move in close. I've noticed, by the way, when I'm moving close to my model, my microphone gets close to my face, so I go all boomy, so I do apologise. I'm going to get our big brush, and you don't need to think about this at all. But I don't want too much, so I've got some tissue. I'm going to get it in there. I'm going to tamp most of it off on the tissue, and all we're going to do is quite simply apply it a bit carelessly. You want to get some of it off because you don't really want it to run into recesses and act like a wash. You want it to just be on the surface. Now it's probably going to be one of those effects that you might not even see. It's just going to be so subtle you probably won't even see it. But if you were to do half of it and not do the other half, you'd definitely notice the difference. But it is a very, very subtle effect. And it's one of those steps that you could almost not do. You don't have to do it, but it does just add something subconsciously. You can kind of register there's something there, especially on metallics. It just gives them a tint. So on this, it's giving it a slight rusty tint. Now it's really subtle, and what you can do if you want is go back and do more later on. Get this back on camera, might be a good idea. You can always do more than one application, but we're just going over everything. I'm just trying to avoid the tyres if I can, but it's probably likely I'll get some on the tyres, but that's not the end of the world. They're going to get covered in mud anyway. And I'll try and avoid like the knapsacks and things, because I'm going to be painting and weathering them separately. So I'll go around and do this. I might need to do more than one coat, so I'll tell you if that's the case. And when we come back, we'll see what the next step is. Now with a filter, if you're painting on oil paints and things like that, typically you want to leave them for about 24 hours to dry. With a filter, you can actually hair dryer it, because it's mostly thinner, and hair drying just gets that thinner off. So you can actually hair dryer it and just leave it for an hour or so, and then come back to it. So I'll go ahead and get this done. When we come back, we'll see what the next step is. Okay, so that's had a little while to dry, and as you can see, it's kind of made no difference at all. It has a little bit. It doesn't really come out on camera because the colour balance is all weird on camera, but it has tinted it ever so slightly, a really tiny amount. I did say it was a subtle effect. It's not in any way an obvious effect. So that's that filter layer down. Now it is completely optional, and you don't have to do that layer. What I'm about to do next kind of shows that it doesn't really make much difference, but I wanted to show it anyway. So what's next? Well, next we're going to do a wash. We're going to do a wash all over the vehicle, and for this we're going to use my favourite paint in the whole world, MiG 502 Abteilung. Where's the label? Starship Filth. Yes, the filth is back. Yeah, it's been a while since I've used it. Now, because this isn't a Gunpla, I can do what I'm about to do. Basically, we're about to do exactly the same thing that we've just done with the filter. But we're making a wash, so we can actually go a bit more intense with the colour on this one. The last coat as a filter needs to be very, very transparent. This one, we just want it to be a wash. So it will colour all the surfaces, but it will also go into all the recesses and shade those. So we've got our Starship Filth. Get a nice big fat dot of it. That might be enough. I'm going to mix this into the thinner. Now Starship Filth itself is a nice kind of brown, blue, grey colour. It's a warm grey. It's kind of an oily tone. Looks like kind of engine oil or something like that. So we're going to make sure this is all mixed in nicely. Mixing, 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 mixing all the paint around. Okay. That's in there nicely. So let's get that off the brush. I'll do a quick test on something. We'll use this lid again. Quick test. See what it looks like. Oh yes, lovely, lovely. Now the thing with oil paints is when you do brush them on, they look quite dark when you put them on, but once they dry, they fade and blend and fade away, so it won't look quite that stark. And I've got a massive brush here, but I might actually get a smaller one because that's probably a bit too big. Let me see if I've got a smaller one. Okay, so I've got my Citadel dry brush. Just put the top back on the paint. Always put the top back on your oil paints, because if you put your elbow down on the tube, you get paint all over your desk and it's a mess, and yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put this everywhere. Now what I might do actually is put some tissue down, because this is going to get very messy. So let me just get some tissue. So we'll get some tissue down. Right. And this couldn't be easier. So this is basically exactly the same process when I can find where I've just put my brush. And all we're going to do is brush this on. We're not going to bother trying to get this off on the tissue first. We're just quite literally going to brush this on. Now again, it's going to be quite subtle. It's not going to be particularly dark, but we don't want it to be dark. The reason I'm not just going in with black or something like that is that black is just a bit too stark and a bit unrealistic. This is like a nice grimy tone. And what it will do is it will collect in the edges and recesses and darken those. It will tint the overall paintwork as well, but it will just give a slightly more grubby look, and it will hopefully blend all the different colours together. Now the important thing to remember is that gravity will be at work here, so it will collect towards the bottom of recesses and panels, which is fine because that mimics real life. Let's just put that there and do that bit, so I can kind of get quite heavy down here because we're going to do a lot of weathering down there anyway. So you need to work kind of fast because you don't want to be holding it, say, like this upside down for a particular period of time, because it will pool up on the top and that would look weird. Pooling up at the bottom is fine because that's what dirt and dust actually does when it gets wet and covered in, you know, gets put into water. The other thing it will do is it will collect around the edges, and you go on as heavy as you want. I'm going to go quite heavy. When it does dry, it will kind of fade. It will fade and blend. If you just use black, black's like a, you can't go back once you've used black. Once you've done black, that's it. It's just, you've got black lines everywhere. So what I may need to do on this, you know, what I'm trying to avoid is really obvious stark panel line contrasts. So this colour just works perfectly because it's a slightly grubby, grimy tone, but not so much that it looks ridiculous. It's a bit like Tamir Smoke in a way. That kind of colour. So I'm going to go around and add this to all the different parts of the vehicle. I might just have to, if you go heavy anywhere like here, you can just go in and brush it off. I'll let it dry for a while, and then once it's dried for a little bit, we'll see how it's doing, see if it needs a second coat. I'll stay away from things like the knapsacks and the bed rolls and stuff again, because they're going to get their own kind of washes later on. So I'll go and get all this done, and we'll see how it comes out. Okay, that's had a chance to dry. Gave it 24 hours, and as you can see, it's added a little bit of a tint to the colour. Again, that was really the main point of it. It does collect a bit in the recesses, but not massively, because it was quite thin, and it's just really tinted it a bit more. Now, it doesn't really come out on camera, because on camera, to get the balance and the light and the white balance and everything right, it looks a bit brighter than it does in real life. In real life, it's a bit darker than this, than you're seeing it now, but it just looks a bit darker, a little bit, and it's got some shade to it. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is we need to do another wash. Lots of washes on this kit. However, with this wash, we're going to be more specific. We're going to do a pin wash, and this is basically a more targeted wash around ridges and edges and recesses. And for this, we're going to use Ammo by MIG Streaking Effects Streaking Grime AMIG 1203. This is wonderful brown colour. I'm just going to decant some into my little glass thing. This thing. If you're wondering what these are, by the way, they're just the things you get tea lights in. So there you go. I do like to decant this stuff purely because it does separate out quite quickly, the carrier and the actual paint pigment. So I like to have it in this because when it separates, you can see what kind of colour it is. When it separates out, I can just give it a quick stir. But more importantly, it's kind of hard to get it out of the pot and control how much you've got on your brush when it's halfway down the pot. The pot's half empty. So I like to do it from this little glass thing here. You see? And when it does start to thin out, it doesn't take, it takes like 5 or 10 minutes and it starts to, you're just putting thinner on then rather than pigment. So you need to be able to go in and just give it a munge around and get the pigment mixed in again. This is an enamel product. This again is absolutely fine to go over your acrylic paints because again, enamels and oils share different thinners completely, so you're not going to be damaging the acrylic paints. And the oils have had 24 hours to dry, so again, they should be fine. They won't come up with the application of this. So Don't get a fine brush, get a reasonable brush, but with a good point. And all we're going to do is quite simply go around some of the edges. Now you don't need to be too neat here. You want to be a bit neat, but not too neat. You can go a little bit heavy if you want, because what we'll do, because you've not put a gloss varnish on here, you're not going to get a whole load of capillary action kicking in. But when it's dried after about 10 or 15 minutes, you can go in with a cotton bud and just gently rub it to soften the edges. So don't worry if you get any really obvious straight lines like that. It will actually all come into its own when we get the cotton bud out after about 10 minutes or so. So I'm just going to work my way around and slowly do all these little details. So I'll just do this bit to show you. So let's put that there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give that 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, just to dry a little bit, and then we'll come back with a cotton bud and I'll show you how to tidy that up. Again, it works best on a gloss coat when you do this, but we've not got a gloss coat, so we'll see how it comes out with just the matte of the paint. So, back in a moment. Okay, that's about 5 minutes to dry, so let's get it tidied up now. I have to say, I suddenly realised when I'm just coming back to film this bit now, I've used totally the wrong colour. Yeah, I was using streaking grime, AMIG 1203. I meant to use engine grime, AMIG 1407, which is more like a kind of road grime and dust and dirt, well, road grime and oil dirt kind of colour. It's more of a grey colour. That's the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to use the engine grime on the rest of the vehicle. I might still use the streaking grime here and there, like around this exhaust area, just because it's more of a reddy colour and it's more suggestive of rust and wear and tear that way. So yeah, quick change, not streaking grime AMIG 1203, but engine grime AMIG 1407. But they're both exactly the same technique, it's just a different colour. So what's next? Next, we need the cotton buds. You'll need to give this 5 or 10 minutes. Enamels take about, well, they can take up to 24 hours to cure fully if you've painted them on. If you've done it like this, they can be cured within a few hours. But for the first sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, maybe the first hour, you've got the ability to remove them. Now what we're going to do, this is just a dry cotton bud, and what we're going to do is try and tidy this up, because as you saw, it's quite a big splobby line. We're not looking for that. Now this would work better on a gloss surface, like I said, but this is a matte surface, it's the paint, so it's not going to be as easy to get off. But all we need to do is, there's a hair there, oh no, right, there was a hair in it. All we need to do is, quite simply, first and foremost, get the cotton bud and it's dry, wipe it over the raised area, just to get the paint off that raised, because a little raised lip there, get it off there. And then around the inside, just get the cotton bud and just gently work it so we can start to fade and blend that colour. Now it will take a little more work than let's start again. It may take a little more work than if this was on a gloss surface. On a gloss surface, you just pretty easily remove all the paint that wasn't in a recess. But because this is on a matte surface, of course, the paint tends to collect in all the imperfections in the matte surface. So it may take a bit more effort. If it's really not coming off and you're really having trouble, you can just moisten your cotton bud, or you could use a fine brush in some thinners, some oil paint thinners or mineral spirit thinners, whatever you're using to thin your oil paints and enamels. But that is what we're looking to do. We're just looking to get rid of that hard edge to it and just soften it, so you can run it along the insides, and it will just turn it from a line of paint into a shadowing effect. And you can see there. Now, like I said before, I did use the wrong colour. This is actually a bit reddy coloured for me. I want that engine grime, because the engine grime is similar to Starship Filth. It's just a dark bluey grey, reasonably warm sort of colour that looks more like road grime and dirt. If you go outside and look at a white transit van, look at, so you've got a builder working next door and he's got a white tranny van. Have a look at that, and have a look at that sort of dark brown grey stuff that's sprayed all up from the bottom of his car upwards and all up the side, and people have written "clean me in it." It's that kind of colour, and that's what I want to get. And the aim of it is to get it round all the raised details, so around all these panels, round all things like these little viewports here, just around the edges, just to put some shadowing in around edges, and this bit here, this edge, just to make those edges stand out. So it's a panel line wash really, But because we're doing it over this matte surface, we can't guarantee it's going to run down panel lines or down edges. So that's why we need to go in with the cotton bud and do this cleaning. Now I might still use that colour here, streaking grime, around this bit, because this is where the rusty exhaust is. So it seems reasonable that some water is going to run down this and leach some of the rust, the iron oxide, down onto these parts. So I might do some little rusty bits around these little panels at the back, but not much. For the rest of it though, I'm going to go in with the engine grime. So I'm going to go and get that done, and then when we come back, we'll see what the next, I'm not sure what the next step is then, so we'll see what that is. So I'll go and get that done. Remember, I didn't use streaking grime, or I did use streaking grime, but I'm going to swap and change to engine grime, AMIG 1407, and you'll see the effect when we come back. So I'll go and get that done. Back in a moment. Okay, so that final wash has had chance to dry, and as you can see, it's looking a bit darker now. Again, on camera, it might not be quite as dark as it is in real life, but you can see we've got some nice shadowing now around the ridges here and around this part, and all over the vehicle. Came out quite nicely on the barrel at the back. Just some nice shading. It's almost like post shading, and that was the idea. What I did as I was going along, I used the method I showed you here when I did it very carefully on some of the parts. And as I got towards parts like this with the dozer blade and all the mechanical stuff here, and underneath where I wanted to do all the sort of the axles and bits of the wheels and the drive shafts and stuff, I just kind of slathered the paint all over. Do it on camera. Slathered the paint all over, gave it 10 or 15 minutes, and then rubbed it off with the cotton bud. And I did that on the base. I just covered the whole thing and then rubbed it with cotton bud and a bit of tissue, because it's quite a big area. And that just gives a bit of a darker tone, a much more grimy and grubby look. So that's come on quite nicely. So what's next? Well, there are a million different things you can do with weathering, but like I said at the very start of this project, we're going to keep it fairly simple for beginners. We don't want to make it too complicated. We want anybody to be able to do this. So we're going to jump on to the next stage now. And what that's going to be is to do something with all these little bed rolls and bits of things around the side. Before we go ahead and start adding dust and dirt and things like that, we need to start making these look a bit more realistic. So what we're going to do is, to start with, we're going to go in with the Game Colour Wash Lavado, or Lavado means wash, 73-200 Sepia shade. Now if you've used your Citadel colours, this is basically Agrax Earth shade. A little bit redder perhaps, giving it a good shake. A little bit redder and darker, but it's pretty darn good stuff. Now it does tend to dry out quite quickly on your palette, so do make work quickly. You can thin it if you want, thin it with water, or if you want to get a proper sort of panel line wash, you can use your Pledge multi-surface wax or your clear. All we're going to do is brush it on neat, and we're just going to apply it to all these knapsacks and packs. And we're probably going to have to do more than one coat just to get the right effect, but you can see it's giving this lovely brown effect. So I just need to make sure I apply this all over all the knapsacks. I want it to, if you thin it with water or Pledge or something like that, or you know, a glaze medium or matte varnish or anything like that, it will tend to collect in recesses just do that. What I'm doing now is I'm tinting the whole thing. I'm collecting it in the recesses, but I'm also changing the colour to a darker browner tone. So I'll just go ahead and get all these done. Okay, while that wash is drying, it's time to go ahead and do the next wash. And this one is going to be a black wash. And we're going to do this on the silver parts, things like the gun, the antennas and things here. We have on the vehicle itself, we have things like the blades for the axe and the spade, and we've got all the silver parts on the dozer blade, including the bits around the front. Now for this, we're going to do a black wash, and we're going to use game ink and black, basically. It is 72094. Now if you've never used an ink before, this is going to be our equivalent of, if you're using Citadel paints, you'll be using Null Oil. So I'm going to give it a good shake. If you've never used an ink before, the best way to use an ink is not neat from the bottle, because it'll be very, very dark. Inks have very, very intense pigments. So you could apply this neat, but it would look a bit weird. You want to make it a bit like a wash, a bit like Null Oil. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the ink. Inks have very, very intense pigments. And then we're going to take some of my Pledge Floor Care Finish, 2 times more shine. 2 times more shine. Or your Future or Clear, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to make a magic wash. Now this is a brilliant way to use an ink. You can use a water to thin an ink, but it does have a slightly different effect. Same as thinning an acrylic paint with water, it can affect the way the pigment binds. The best way to do it is with something like Pledge or your gloss varnish, something like that. You can use a matte varnish if you want. Inks do dry naturally glossy. And all we're going to do, take some of the ink and we're going to mix it in to the Pledge. There's no hard and fast rule about this. It doesn't have to be anything specific, any specific thinning. There's no percentage here. We just want to get a dark wash basically. So I'm going to get that off and clean the brush off. And then we're going to take some of this. We're basically just making our own null oil. We're going to knock the camera. And then all we're going to do is brush it on. Now what the Pledge or your gloss varnish of choice will do is it will help it flow. If you use the ink neat, again, it will look fine, it'll just be very, very dark, and it will tend to colour the whole thing really intensely, as well as going into all the recesses. If you use something to thin it, so you can use a glaze medium, you can use the Pledge like I am, you can use a gloss varnish. There are specific game colour or Vallejo products for doing this, although I'm not sure they are because I haven't got them. You just want something to thin the ink down, but ideally not water, because like I say, water will affect the way it dries and it may go a bit patchy and a bit bitty. You'll see patches and watermarks. The Pledge, because it's acrylic varnish, basically helps it to maintain the cohesion of the pigment, so it doesn't go all watermarky, not as much. It does run into the recesses. If you wanted to do just a pin wash, you could thin it down quite significantly with your Pledge or your glaze medium. Doesn't matter if it's matte or gloss, doesn't really matter. You could thin it down significantly and then it would just run into the recesses. This is really kind of about a 50-50 mix, so it's not going to be that intense. It's going to run into the recesses but also colour the surface it goes over. I'm going over the ammunition here as well. And if you used Citadel colours before, this is basically null oil, but we're doing, it's a gloss, it's like null oil gloss. Null oil gloss is basically ink with a gloss medium. So there you go, that's going to do for the gun. When that dries, it will dry gloss, but it doesn't really matter if you use a matte or a satin, as long as it's basically an acrylic medium of some sort. So I'm going to put some on this aerial just to make it all match and darken. We'll go over the top bit. And we'll go around the back. We'll go over this thing here. We'll just generously coat it. And I'll also go over this part, which was the sort of the rubbery ring that we did. This will collect in the recess bits, and we did the rubber ring in a grey colour, so this will add the darkness. It'll go into the recesses and stay away a little bit from the raised parts, and it'll just give it that darkness. Now that obviously will dry gloss, but that's not a problem. So I'll go around and do the other parts on the main vehicle body. As I say, we've got the spade and the axe and the front of the dozer blade, and then when we come back, we've got one more effectively sort of shade or this kind of wash to do, and that's on these green bits, and then we can start actually painting over to bring the colours back. You can see the effect that brown has on the knapsack there. That's really dark, it's still drying, but that's fine because we're gonna layer over that. So I'll go off and get the rest done, and then when we come back we'll do these, and then we'll crack on with the layering. I'm back in a moment. Okay, so that's the black wash done. Now, when you put the black wash on, if you're making your own wash like this, if you're using an ink, you can use normal artist's ink, by the way. You don't have to use the Vallejo stuff. Any old artist's ink will do, but just make sure you're thinning them down to use them, and you're using something that has acrylic binders in it, like the Pledge gloss varnish or a matte varnish, acrylic matte varnish, or glaze medium or something like that. Not just water, because it won't work the same way. You can do it, it just won't look quite as good. I did do a second coat. If it's not quite dark enough, just go ahead and do a second coat after about 10 or 15 minutes, and it will start to dry quite nicely. You can see it's tinted the silver parts of the gun a sort of darker grey gunmetal colour, but it's also collected in the recesses here and darkened those. But you can see around the edge of those little holes, hopefully it comes out on camera, you've got the surface bit here has been tinted darker. The hole is black, but there's a nice clean silver bit around the edge, and that's the beauty of a wash if you thin it down with something other than water. So if you can use Pledge Floor Care Finish, 2 times more shine, or the UK version is Pledge Multi-Surface Wax. They're really good as acrylic mediums to put them in. You can get the Vallejo Glaze mediums, they're exactly the same kind of thing. They also help it stay liquid a bit longer. So that's been done. On the vehicle itself, I did go ahead and do the tools on the front. I did an all-over wash for both tools, so over the wood and the little binding areas and the blades as well. That's just drying off. I went ahead and just covered the whole of the dozer blade in it, I was fairly careless and just slapped it all over and moved it around a bit with the brush so it didn't collect and pool up, because I want them to look oily and dirty, so it just gives this nice oily look to the sort of the heads here, the bolt heads. And on these tops of the shock absorbers I did a little touch of it as well, just to give that kind of oily lubricant look. I also did some on the blade, but it's not going to come out, but I did it all over the metal part of the blade and a bit on the front and under these ridges here and here, just to give it some darkness. A lot of that will be covered up by earth. So that is done. Next bit we have to do, the last little wash we need to do, is these green hatch covers. Now you remember we went over these with the filters and the washes before. That didn't really matter, you didn't have to do that, because we're going to cover these up. Now, this is where I have to use a Games Workshop product, which, as I've said before, unfortunately at the moment eModels don't stock these, but it's purely because I need a green wash and I haven't got one. And I know to get that kind of interior APC colour, Athonian camo shade from Citadel is perfect. And now, as I say, you can make your own. You just need a dark green colour, and again, whatever you use to thin the black ink. So your gloss varnishes, your gloss acrylic varnishes, glaze medium, something like that. Anything like that, matte varnish will do. Just don't use water because it doesn't quite work the same way. And all we're going to do with this is quite simply just brush it on. So I've got some of this shade. What we basically made, if you know your Citadel shade, what we basically made with the ink and the gloss varnish was a shade, and that's what all these shades basically are. Is it's a pigment with an acrylic binder and carrier fluid. So what I'm going to do is brush this all over the lid here, and what this will do is darken the lid quite nicely and also run into all the recesses and make those darker as well. So I just need to go around, knock the camera, obviously, knock the camera and cover these completely. I need to go around the edges as well. And it doesn't matter that it looks really dark, because we're going to do some dry brushing and stuff over these. So I'll go and get these done, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I did tell a little bit of a fib. We're not going to show the next step. I've just noticed how long this episode is, so we're going to call it an episode for this and carry on in the next one. But we are basically done now with all the shading. Effectively, what we've done in this episode is do all the weathering to the paint to get the paint looking to the point where I want it, before we start adding the weathering from the ground, like dust and dirt and things like that. We do still need to bring back some layering on these covers and on the bed rolls and things like that to make them look not just like a brown with a brown wash. We need to start layering on more colours. So in the next episode, what we'll do, we'll start off by finishing off the bed rolls and these bits that we've washed. We'll do some layering of other colours just to make them look a bit more three-dimensional. We don't need to do anything else to the paintwork on the vehicle. That's exactly where I want it. This is now where I want the paint to be. We've painted the paint on the vehicle effectively. We've given it chipping, we've given it shading, and we've done some other bits and bobs. The next bit for weathering is dust and dirt and earth, which is going to take 5 minutes. It's not going to be hard at all. Like I said at the start of this series and a little earlier, I'm not going into too much depth with this. You know, I could start doing streaking and rust spots and fading and lots of other things on the paintwork, but I want to keep it fairly straightforward for the novice builder, somebody who's just starting out. There'll be other builds where we go into a lot more detail about things, but this is where I want this one to be. So next episode we'll start the layering, we'll get the dry brushing done here, and we'll get these painted up and layered up so they look kind of, you know, awesome and realistic. I forgot to mention, when I did the sepia wash, I also did it on the straps on the barrel on the back. When I did the black wash, I also did it on the gun on this on these backpacks. Now if you notice here, I did the backpacks themselves and these two bottles in the sepia wash, but I didn't do the gun. Then I went back and I did the gun, this last gun, with the black wash, and the wash on the bottles wasn't quite dry, so it's merged them all together and blended them quite nicely. And you can see the kind of effect these washes have. It darkens it, it tints it, but it also brings out all that beautiful detail, like the little aquila there and the retractable stock on the rifle and the little buttons. It just separates them out. Those silver parts were kind of lost amongst the backpack and the black and the blue of the rifle, of the gun. So it just brings all those details out. You can see on the bedroll on the back here, it's brought out that kind of rolled up texture that you couldn't really see before. It gives it a three-dimensionality. So that's what we want. This episode was really just getting the shade in there to give it some three-dimensionality. Now we need to build these back up, and we're going to do that by layering colours on top to bring back the highlights. So the base colour was just the base colour, and we'll go through that in the next episode, so I don't need to explain that right now. So shut up, Fox. So that's going to do us. Catch up for the next one when we'll start on all that, and next one should hopefully be the last episode for the vehicle, because when we finish that, that should be done. I won't show painting this helmet on the side, because I'll be showing all that when we paint the figures anyway, so I don't need to show it. I'll just get that painted up in advance. Anyway, I shall stop waffling. I don't half waffle and go on sometimes. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to check out emodels.co.uk, the people for whom I'm making this video and my channel sponsors, who very kindly provided this AML-90 kit. It's the UK's leading online model retailer. They've got so much in stock. They've got everything you'd ever need. They've got tools, paints, books, kits, guides. They do remote control. They do all kinds of stuff. We always say if they haven't got it, you don't need it. What we mean is if you're looking for a thing and they haven't got the exact one you want, there's probably something else just as good in there. However, if you do go online and you can't find a specific thing you're looking for, if you look anywhere on the shop and it's not there, it's either just temporarily out of stock, or it's something they don't normally stock, but they can get for you from one of their distributors 99% of the time. So if there is something there you can't find it and there's nothing else that will tickle your fancy quite as much, just drop them an email. Drop them an email and ask them if they can get it or when they'll have it back in stock, and they'll get you sorted out. So do go and check them out. They're an awesome group of folks. But that's going to do us. Thank you so much for watching again. Stay tuned for the next one. Take care of yourselves. Until next time, go make something awesome. Go be awesome. And adios, amoebas.